On this show, we are no stranger to tearing apart random movies and explaining their accuracies or inaccuracies in relation to their agricultural information. And this episode will be no different. This is Talk Ag to Me. Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brennan Black, and in today's episode, we're talking all about the recently released Disney movie, Strange World. And while this movie has had some controversial opinions shown about it since its release, the one that we're focusing on is the movie's take on agriculture's environmental relationship, the relationship that agriculture has with the environment, with the earth, and with just the overall society as a whole. So we're going to talk about that in depth, but to help us with that subject, we have a former guest from the show, Joey, from his podcast, Affable Chat. Joey is a great guest. He's been on a couple episodes on Talk Ag to Me, and I've been on a couple episodes of his show. We've done some collaborations. He's just a lot of fun, brings a lot of energy to the table, and him and I get so caught up in our conversation, we often forget how long we've been going. This episode is one of the longest we've ever recorded, but it is all worth the listen. There's so much talked about in this episode, and I would definitely recommend you listen for throughout the entire thing because there's some really interesting things talked about towards the end here. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Make sure that you follow, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the things. Make sure the podcast gets shared around, and make sure, more importantly, that you're not just sharing it on social media, but you're talking about these things with your family, your friends. The main idea of this podcast is not to get more likes or more clicks on social media. It's just to get the word out there more. So if you're sharing this information that you're learning from these episodes with other people around you, that's really the goal of all of this. That being said, we do have a Patreon that is linked down in the description. If you're interested in donating anything to benefit the podcast, then you are more than welcome to do that. That is not required. You're not getting, you're not going to be asked to do that. That's just something that is there if you choose to, and I greatly appreciate it. But it is by no means something that you have that you need to feel obliged to do. So thank you all so much for that, and thank you all so much just for supporting all of this. Make sure you go check out the last episode where we talked to Tyler about the California flood situation, and make sure you go check out Joey's channel, Affable Chat, and you show him all the appreciation and support that he definitely deserves. But without further ado, now that all my announcements are out of the way, let's hop into the episode. All right, so we are here once again with Joey from the. Actually, you know what? I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Joey. Let everyone know who you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joey from Affable Chat. We are a weekly movie podcast. We talk about whatever we want to talk about, but mostly we talk about movies. And yeah, Brendan and I have been doing this, or not been doing this together, but have been guesting each other's shows for a few years now. So excited to be back. Excited to talk about this movie. So good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Yeah, and as Joey mentioned, he has been on the show several times talking about a variety of movies. I've been on his show a couple times talking about movies. It is always fun to do episodes together. I feel like some of our best content comes out whenever we collaborate. So yeah, it's always a pleasure. I'm excited to have you back on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as Joey alluded to, we are talking about a movie today, and it's a movie that is not to say controversial, but it's a little less popular than most these days. It's a new Disney movie that just came out a couple months ago, I believe, and it is it is definitely not a family classic, I guess I would say, for a variety of reasons that we're going to get into. But yeah, so I guess without further ado, let's just hop straight into it. Today we are talking about the movie Strange World. So Joey, I don't know if you've done any research into this movie outside of watching it, but if you have, do you have any? I know you like to do kind of like the behind the scenes stuff. Do you have any background information on this movie for us?
Not exactly, except that the only thing is I have a friend who works at Disney Animation, and this was the first movie he got credited on.
Wow.
He actually worked on Encanto as well, but I think he joined the team too late to be in the credits. But this time he is. So it was really exciting. He was talking about the whole thing, not in much detail because there's obviously an embargo on it, but just talking about working on the movie and when it came out. And he's like, I'm surprised there wasn't more marketing for it because it definitely seemed like it slipped under the radar. If he hadn't been talking about it, I probably would have seen maybe a couple of mentions on it of it on Reddit, but I didn't see any trailers. I didn't see like anything about it, any merchandise or anything. So yeah, it really didn't seem like it was very popular in terms of marketing. And I still, it doesn't seem like many people have watched it. It's got, just looking it up right now, it's got a 5.6 out of 10 on
Oh wow.
IMDb, and a 2.6 review out of 5, I guess, on Google. It seems like a lot of
Wow.
people didn't like this movie.
Yeah. No, I mean it's kind of interesting. So I first discovered this movie when my girlfriend and I went to go watch Spider-Man No Way Home
Mm,
because it was one of the opening trailers in the movie theater. And we were extremely excited whenever we saw the trailer for it because we were like, oh man, this is really cool. They have a Pixar movie about a farmer who's going on an adventure to save his home planet, like all this kind of stuff. Like
yeah.
it was firing off all kinds of stuff for me, you know. So I was super excited. And then we didn't really get much more from it for a long time. I think we got a couple more trailers right before the release, but it kind of, like you said, just kind of swept under the radar, and a lot of people missed it. And then it finally came out, and we just heard a bunch of bad things about it, so we kind of avoided it for a little while, and then eventually we sat down and watched it one day. And I mean, it wasn't a horrible movie. There's definitely parts I enjoyed about it, but it just kind of wasn't a whole lot special, in my opinion, at least. I don't know if you have any different thoughts. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely some. Obviously, there's some talking points there, or else we wouldn't be discussing it. But yeah, what was your impression of it, Joey?
I thought it was great. I think that it has its issues for sure. I think the climax doesn't really make any sense at all. Also, is kind of antithetical to the entirety that the movie is trying to go for. But I think that I really like that it's a unique world. I've got some very unique character designs, and got this great family aspect to it. I love all the strange creatures that are in there. I mean, I think just the premise alone of like the town, or the country, I guess, of Avalonia being like isolated by these mountain range that they can't penetrate, and then Jaeger Clade, the main character's father, disappears into the mountains because he's an epic explorer, and that's his legacy that he wants to leave. I think that's very compelling, and so I was really hooked from the very beginning. And I like the little theme song they had at the beginning too, where they're talking about Jaeger Clade and Baby Clade. Very clever. Um, and yeah, I think that the allegory for ethanol and then just environmentalism in general, and then the kind of Gaia idea, I think is pretty powerful one, especially since Avatar just is back in theaters. I think all of that's kind of coalescing here, and I think that makes it pretty compelling. But yeah, I think overall, I don't know how much this movie is going to sit in my mind or anything. I think there's certain elements of it that are making me think about it. The one thing that stood out to me was I just read Philip Dietermer's book Immune, which is the guy who makes that YouTube show Kurzgesagt.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He's been obsessed with the immune system for a long time. I bought the book because I'm a big fan of the YouTube channel, and it was very, very interesting. And this movie is sort of about the immune system,
Mhm.
not in as much as I liked it to be, but I think that it sort of opens the door to saying maybe there's a creative way to very like unknown area of the human body through animation and through a kind of a clever story. So all those things kind of stood out to me, but I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. Usually for movies like this, it'll take me about a week or so to be like, am I still thinking about it or not? But I just watched it yesterday, so it's certainly fresh in my mind. Certainly elements that I'm thinking about, but I don't
Yeah,
know if it's gonna stand the test of time.
you still have time to forget it. It's okay. But
Exactly.
no, I absolutely agree with a majority of those points. I guess before I go into my analysis of it, it'd probably be important to break down the actual plot of the story because we kind of didn't do that yet. But for anyone who's watching that hasn't seen the movie yet, big spoiler warnings. We're going to be talking a little bit about, actually quite a bit about the end of the movie and its relationship with the entire story. But essentially, to put it in a nutshell, you have, as Joey mentioned, this family of adventurers. You have Jaeger Clade and you have his son,
Searcher Clade.
Searcher Clade. Thank you. I was wanting to say Sam for some reason, but I was like, that's not his name.
Pretty great name, honestly. Big
It
fan of
is.
Searcher Clade as a name.
Yeah, I really liked that. And they're this adventuring family. They're trying to conquer the mountains that are surrounding their village, and they're trying to figure out what's on the other side. the plot kind of gets started when Searcher almost dies during one of their exhibitions. He falls into this massive avalanche, and Jaeger barely catches him and gets him out of it. And as they're trying to leave, he discovers these plants that have this electrical energy kind of emanating off of them. And he sees potential in bringing those plants home and using them as an energy source instead of potentially finding something over the mountains that may or may not be there. And that triggers this, obviously this massive schism in the family. Jaeger is ashamed that his son doesn't want to adventure, and Searcher is ashamed that his dad doesn't want to actually help the people back home. He just wants to explore. So they split their paths. Jaeger goes off, and Searcher goes back home, becomes a hero of the town, bringing energy to the world. All this kind of great stuff.
Yeah,
and then
totally revolutionizes the society. It's like early or late 1800s or something. There's horse and buggies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cobblestone streets. And then when he brings back this plant, we jump in time 25 years, and now they have coffee, they have electricity, right? Lights and everything. It's all powered off of these the plants, which are called pando.
Pando,
Um,
right.
right. These little green berry like things that when you crush them or bite into them, they let off like an electrical charge.
Mm. Yeah, and like Joey said, this completely changes the way their society is built. Now they have hovercrafts and flying cars, and they have technology that's way more advanced than stuff that we even have today. And it's all powered by this one plant that everyone seems to be growing, and that Searcher is the kind of the father of, and he has figured out the best way to cultivate it and the best way to raise it. And over time, they learn. One of the members of Jaeger's adventuring party comes back and lets Searcher know that there's something wrong with the world. The pando plants are dying. They're trying to figure out what's actually killing them, and so they need to journey. It's basically journey to the center of the earth.
Yep.
Essentially.
It's exactly that.
So they journey to the center of the earth and find this strange world. The title of the movie, with abnormal creatures and all these weird colorful plants that move, and parts of the planet that move, and like all this weird this ecosystem that's unlike anything they've ever seen. Trying to figure out what's going on
For a second. So
oh yeah, sorry.
Searcher has his own family now. He has a son
Yes.
named Ethan and a wife, Meridian. And Ethan, he's been teaching Ethan how to be a farmer, but Ethan is kind of obsessed with his grandfather, Jaeger, and he kind of wants to know more about him, but Searcher doesn't want to talk about him because he's ashamed of him, like as you mentioned. So there's sort of, but then at the same time, it becomes clear that Searcher is becoming terrified that his son may follow in his grandfather's footsteps instead of his own. Thus, completing the cycle. Early we start to see this dynamic in the family where sons disappoint their fathers by doing something different than what they are expected to. So
Yes.
Ethan stowaways onto the ship that's going to the center of the earth. And they're surprised that he's there. He also brought the dog, the three-legged dog, Legend.
Right. I
My
love
favorite
Legend.
character.
Yeah.
So and then they end up, they get attacked by some bird-like creatures, and they end up in the center of the earth in this strange world. As I said, and pretty soon, Searcher runs into his father. Jaeger is there, living under there as some sort of like crazy man. He's got long hair, his crazy robe, and a flamethrower that he uses to fight off what he calls the Reapers, which are like orbs that have tentacles in them.
Right. And they're controlled by smaller versions of themselves, that one of which becomes attached to Ethan and becomes his pet, Splat,
Yes, that's right.
as they refer
Because
to in the
Ethan
movie.
saves him, because Splat was originally leading him to his death, but then Ethan
Right.
saves him, and then Splat changes his mind and ends up helping the rest of the party.
Right. Yeah. Because he originally stole one of Searcher's like cloths or kind of like handkerchief things, and then Ethan finds it and says, "That's my dad's." And then this leads to this whole dynamic between them. Ethan now kind of has like his own sidekick, whereas like Legend was kind of there, but now Legend is kind of more Searcher's. So there's this whole like it's a strange right. Yeah. It's a strange dynamic of like repetition in the family, but also like authenticity, I guess. Like everyone's like trying to be their own thing, but in doing so they're actually repeating something else that somebody else has done. It's a weird situation. But yeah, so
and then so then they're on their way there, right? And they're flying their little ship, which had originally crash landed, but they were able to fix it. And as they're on the way, the three generations are interacting with each other, right? There's a lot of tension between Searcher and his father, Jaeger, and then Ethan and the two of them, right?
Mhm.
Which way is he going to go? And they end up playing some sort of board game together, which is called Primal Outpost, which is
Yes.
some sort of like, it looks kind of like Settlers of Catan. It's got like
I
hexagons
was
and
gonna
stuff,
say, yeah.
and they like have to get resources. And Ethan tells him that the point of the game is to use the environment around them to live in harmony. And so Searcher and Jaeger are trying to defeat the monsters that are in there, but Ethan keeps trying to tell them that the monsters are there to help them.
Mhm.
And this becomes, it's sort of a little tidbit, a little hint about what's going to happen in the future.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, leading up to this point, we see this kind of diversity and generation perspective, because Jaeger is very hostile towards the environment that he's in, right? Like he sees it as an enemy, he sees it as something that's trying to kill him. Searcher is just trying to go back home. He just wants to continue farming. And then you have Ethan, who is very much like this is a world to be learned from. This is a place that we need to protect. So you see those three different perspectives. Even though Ethan is very much trying to be like his grandfather in the adventuring sense, he has almost the exact opposite personality in terms of his perspective towards his environment around him, which creates an interesting dynamic between the three going forward.
I think it's probably one of the strongest parts of this movie. I think
Mm-hmm.
all three of those characters and their conflicting personal dilemmas and their like worldview, and how that interacts with each other is very interesting. There's this interesting progression, like as you just mentioned, from
Mm-hmm.
Jaeger seeing the environment as totally hostile, Searcher seeing the environment as something to be utilized, and then Ethan seeing the environment as something to live in harmony with.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting, and it takes a while for you kind of to, or as for the audience to kind of come to realization about what each of those things means and what the end result is. And the
Mm-hmm.
truth is that all of the characters are very similar, and they all kind of want the same thing, but don't really understand each other's perspective. There's one thing that the movie does, a really interesting little thing that they do, which is members of the family will mimic each other or act in like simultaneously, where like Meridian and Ethan will sigh at the same time, or
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, Jaeger and Searcher will say the same thing at the same time, or do the same kind of mannerism at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, showing that they're very similar. They're kind of in step with each other. It's an interesting visual way to show how this family is in sync and how they all kind of like vibe together. I thought that was an interesting animation choice for sure.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And then, I think that going forward, having that dynamic between the three really sets up the climax to be something really interesting. And in my opinion, the climax was not quite handled the way I thought it could have been for what they had
Absolutely
set up.
not. Right.
um,
So they have to cross all these dangerous areas, right? One of the things they have to cross is the acid sea, which Jaeger has never been able to get across. He's explored basically the entire area that he's been around, but
mhm,
he wasn't able to get across the acid sea. But when they reach that, Splat, the little blue guy that's Ethan's friend, talks to the little acid monsters that live there, and they agree to help navigate the airship across the sea safely.
mhm.
And when they get there, they're able to continue on. So
Yeah, yeah. And so as we work closer into the center of this earth, we start to see a lot more different types of relationships between different types of organisms in this environment, and we're starting to see that this ecosystem is very much a it was very much that it's a living body,
yes,
both figuratively and eventually, as we learn, quite literally. All the creatures in this environment work together to maintain the environment, and they work together to eliminate potential hostile threats. And as we go through the different parts of the body, we learn that the parts of the body are working, in ways that are meant to maintain the body's condition, whereas parts of the body are working to help it grow and develop and become stronger. Like we see this happen, and as you kind of alluded to towards the beginning, there's that kind of immune system effect that we're starting to see a hint of, and then we just get smacked over the side of the head with it when we actually get to the middle, which we eventually learn to be the heart, which is revealed to us much after the actual conflict of the story, which is we see this this growth from the Pando on this central unit of the Earth that they believe is killing it. They believe that if we can get the enemies off, or they believe is
Yeah, okay. So there's like three levels here, right? There's like some sort of rocky substance in the center, which the
Mhm,
Pando is like around. It's like really, really strong there. And Searcher is trying to figure out why the electricity seems to be so much stronger and why the roots seem to be so much stronger at this area. And then
mhm,
they see waves and waves of the monsters that they had fought earlier, the bird things that had attacked them at the beginning, the Reapers from earlier. They're up there like hammering away at the Pando plants.
mhm,
It seems like all of the energy that normally they'd been harvesting was being concentrated at this one spot to protect itself. And so they start their obvious thing is like, let's kill all these monsters and help out the Pando, right? So they explode up a bunch, so their flamethrowers and the guns with like crushed up Pando, and start using it basically as pesticide
right.
to sweep over all of the monsters. But in the process, Ethan and Searcher have an argument, and Ethan grabs one of the hover bikes, or no, yeah, I think so, or maybe he
Yeah.
jumps onto one of the bloodstreams. I'm not
No,
sure.
he jumps onto one of the bird things, and then Searcher chases after him with the hoverbike.
Right. And then so he starts flying away, and then somehow both of them end up outside, out
Mhm.
where there's like a vast ocean. And they look up and they see the mountains. They're on the other side of the mountains. As Jaeger had always wanted, but Jaeger's not there. And when they turn around, they see the mountain move, and a giant eye is there staring at them. They're like right there in the center of it.
Mhm.
So they all at once, it all becomes clear. They are not in some sort of dead landmass. They are in some sort of living creature. They are living on top of it. And they had just been inside it. Ethan's like, oh, the stomach. That's the acid sea. Oh, those like things that were moving through it are the bloodstreams. And oh, that must be the immune system that's fighting off the invaders, us. And that means that the thing that the Pando is attacking, or the Pando is around, is the heart of this creature. And therefore, the mission is completely flipped, right? Instead
Mhm.
of saving the Pando, they have to kill the Pando, and help the immune system fight off all the invaders.
Right. So yeah, so then that leads them to go back into the heart of the beast, and they let everyone know that they need to change the mission around. There's this massive conflict.
Yeah, doesn't make
The
any
people
sense.
who yeah, right. Exactly. The people who oriented the original mission are now trying to stop the family from doing the right
They
thing.
lock them in a locker.
Right. Which Block or Splat can just squeeze underneath and let them out, besides not knowing how to do that because they spend 10 minutes trying to get Legend to do it. That's a whole thing. But anyways, they, long story short, they get out, they do the right thing. Jaeger tries to run off, and then he realizes that Searcher was right and that he's been a bad dad, and he comes back and he actually tries to help them. They break off the Pando, the heart starts beating again. There's actually this moment where the heart doesn't beat, and they think they're too late.
Classic.
Right, yeah, that has like the suspense of like, oh no, we didn't do it. And then obviously that the heart starts beating again and everything is okay. And then they kind of just return to normal. They go back up to the yeah, they go back to the mainland. Ethan stays down and continues observing the strange world underneath, and Searcher and Jaeger go back to farming, but now they farm actual crops instead of Pando. Searcher goes back to find his ex-wife. There's a whole side plot there. And the movie just kind of closes off with this like, nothing really like, they don't have like this shifted perspective or anything. It's kind of just like, yeah, we just stopped farming Pando and now everything's fine.
Well, so I was thinking about this because it's not very clear, but because I was confused about what was going on. But actually, what happens is they start creating turbines for renewable energy.
Right. Yeah, I forgot
So
about that.
they stop using the Panda, which means that a lot of the conveniences that they had built up over the last 25 years are no longer useful. But Meridian and I guess some of the other adventuring people start finding other ways to generate electricity, and they have like a big wind turbine attached to one of their hovercrafts
Hmm.
that they're able to use to start powering the town. So it seems like they were able to transition successfully to a different source of power, one that wouldn't directly damage their host. And then the whole thing is there's a big zoom out. They zoom all the way out, and you can see that they're living on the back of a giant turtle that's swimming through a world covered in ocean, a
Mm-hmm.
water world, you might even say.
You're right. Yeah, that's a callback to another episode we did. But yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, they pan out. They see they're living on this giant turtle. Very, you mentioned Avatar earlier, very lion turtle-esque.
Yes,
And
yes, very lion turtle or Discworld. Too.
right, yeah. Oh, side note, I'm gonna cut this part out. I have not renewed my subscription for Zoom, so the meeting will end in 10 minutes. I will invite
Okay.
you back though, just so you
Okay.
know.
Okay.
So if it ends out of nowhere, just give me a second and we'll hop back in.
Okay. Okay. You're gonna send it to me in Reddit again?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, I'll do that.
I have it open already.
Perfect. I will get that ready just so it is good to go. But yeah, so like they start yeah, so they start farming again. They start kind of going back to how life was. Like you mentioned, they find other sources of renewable energy. Ethan just continues his dream of adventuring like his grandfather, but he doesn't have the environment's hostile mentality. He has a very different approach to it. And the whole movie resolves with this idea that we don't necessarily need to rely on more conventional methods of energy production. We can use renewable energy sources and still maintain the environment and all that kind of stuff. And that was at least what I gathered, kind of the central theme of it is let's not kill the earth to continue to produce. I don't know if you had a different perspective on the ending or not.
No,
But
it's absolutely what it is. It's a pretty ham-fisted, pretty obvious environmental message, right? Well, this is the if we continue down this path, then there will be untold consequences. One of the
right.
things that I think the movie doesn't do a good job of is show the harm that the Pando was doing to their environment beyond its own destruction, right?
Mhm.
They were like, oh, it's not working anymore, and it's become such a thing we rely on that this is going to be devastating, right? But when we go down into the strange world, into the inside of this giant turtle, um, we learned that the pando is sort of infecting things, right? You can
Mhm.
actually see it like its tendrils roping through the world there. And if at first glance, right, it seems like it should be there, but then later it becomes obvious that it should never have been there. It's some sort of virus or parasite or something like that. But
Mhm.
you would expect that to have some sort of effect on Avalonia, right? You would expect
Right.
that to be like the other crops are dying, or the mountains are crumbling. I don't know, something's happening that's not good, right? And
Mhm.
instead it's just the panda that's being threatened, and then that leads them to like having to follow the source down to the beginning, which is also confusing too, because Searcher finds the plants on the side of a mountain, right?
Right.
And he's like, okay, we're going to take these back and see what we can do with them, which obviously turns out to be a good idea. But then it's like, oh, all of the pando are is actually one plant. It's actually all coming from the same root system, which is kind of a weird thing to know if they can't like see, like they don't know what's below them, right?
Right.
I mean, it was, but I guess maybe it has like maybe they're making a reference to bananas, right? How all
Yeah.
bananas are clones of each other, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That could be.
and like how they're like they're extremely vulnerable to like pests because every single banana is the same. There's no mutations between them, so lots of crop
Right.
dusting, which leads to birth defects. It's crazy out there in the banana world. Don't buy
Oh
bananas.
yeah. Oh yeah.
but
No.
it's
Yeah. We
but
did a whole episode on that another time. But yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
it's yeah. So it's like, where did it come from, right? Like over the last 25 years, I guess that this thing has been growing further and further into the earth until it wrapped itself around the heart of Gaia. Or is this did they tap into this structure that was already there? Like, how did it get to this point is kind of my question. And
Yeah.
it's not clear at all that's really consistent. Definitely
Yeah.
feels like at some point something kind of switches, right? Obviously, the whole it seems kind of in retrospect, it's pretty obvious that Panda was never going to be the ultimate solution for this town, but it seems strange that at first it seems like, oh, this is such a good thing, this is the problem, now we're going to solve this problem using some of the technology that we gained from doing it, to becoming the central enemy that they were trying to defeat. I
Right.
don't know. It's it doesn't exactly work as far as the narrative goes. It feels like we're missing pieces at the beginning that should be reflected at the end.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think that, which I never really gave my evaluation of the movie as a whole earlier, so I'm going to do that now in conjunction with it, with addressing some of the points that you made. Um, Side note for the movie itself, I think that like the animation, the visuals, the world that they presented, even the concept of the movie, spectacular. I think it was very, very well done on paper. I think that, like you mentioned, a lot of the plot points kind of start to fall through if you start to put too much logic onto it. And that's kind of why I wanted to address it from an episode perspective today, because a lot of the points that they address that are plot points are things that are like, if you were a better farmer, that would not have happened, because
Mm.
like a lot of those like mistakes, like the entirety of the movie is just caused by one central mistake in agriculture, which is don't monocrop too hard and not have any backup plan. Like that's it's really
Makes sense.
it's really simple. Which I mean, we see that happen, in modern agriculture too. Like we see people that monocrop until they leach their soil and then it's just dead. But 25 years is a really, really long time to not notice any side effects. Like you mentioned, we would have seen something else happen if this virus was really that deadly, and we saw nothing. There was
Right.
no like if we're thinking about this from a virus perspective on a human body, other systems would have started failing at some point by now. Even if this is a very, very slow moving virus and this is a very, very powerful being, because obviously it is, we would have saw, like, even when we went down to the strange world, we didn't see hardly any abnormalities. I mean, everything seemed to be functioning just as it normally would.
Yes, it's
Um,
very strange, right? Normally you would
mhm.
see they're like, oh, there's a blight here. It's like,
Right.
oh, everything's very colorful and bright. And then over here, like that's the dark lands.
Hmm.
And maybe that's like where Jaeger's living. Like he's like, this is the only place that's safe, right?
Right.
But
Could
like
be.
like that makes him like, it sort of shrouds him in this villain arc, which is sort of the idea, right? Even Ethan sort of states that, right? He's like, there are no bad guys, but maybe you guys are the bad guys, which is sort of
Right.
true, right? There are the invaders, they're the ones making the problem. But I mean, going back to what you just said, the Pando seems to have no trouble defending itself at
Right.
all, right? Like it's diverting all its resources toward the center thing. We see over and over again these monsters or parts of the immune system attacking it and then just immediately like dying. They
Right.
do not seem to be a match for this stuff. So, yeah, I don't understand why, like, everything else, like if this is a story about environmentalism,
Hmm.
why there isn't larger effects. Why isn't there a
Right.
cascade at the top of the mountain,
Hmm.
um, instead of simply this one targeted issue, right? And also, like, it kind of undercuts its message when it's the Pando is a threat to itself, right? They're like, oh, we need to go down there and find out what's wrong with it because it's become such a convenience for us. But
Hmm.
like the story of environmentalism is not that, like, electricity becomes a like we don't be able to make more electricity. The problem is that there are other systems in our world that we depend on that are failing because of our reliance on electricity, right?
Right.
There should be some cascade domino effect. Maybe don't make it obvious, like why are these things connected? But somehow throughout the course of the story, as your understanding deepens, as your journey to the center deepens, things start to come together so that you understand like how everything's connected, right?
Yeah.
That should be your Gaia story, is
No, I
ultimately every piece is part of another piece. And without one, the whole thing crumbles.
Right. No, I completely agree. And I think that it's also worth mentioning that we never really get any kind of understanding of the risk. Like, what if they didn't stop the panda? What would have happened? Like, we don't see that. Like you said, we don't see
Yeah.
any of their systems failing. When they actually go see the eye of the turtle, we never get any kind of inclination that the turtle is uncomfortable, that it's in pain, that it's struggling.
Its
We
heart doesn't
don't.
seem to be moving, but its eyes are able to open.
Right. Like we don't see any sign that this thing is in any kind of way suffering. So like what if they didn't stop the panda? Would it have killed it just immediately? Like we didn't see any sign of that actually happening.
Yes.
So like it's just not very clear that stopping the panda was a great decision because we don't know what it did. You know, we don't know what they saved. So it's hard to get behind a message when you don't actually know what the message is for. You know, so there's no risk assessment. I mean, like we don't know what actually stopping the panda is going to do, you know. So I wish that like if that would have been explained a little more, if they would have said like if we don't stop this, then you know this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. Like you said, there's no domino effect. You know, it's just like it, and we don't know that it's no or nothing. You know, we don't know that it's just going to instantly kill this planet. But like none of that is made clear to us, so we don't really like. If there's no stakes, then why do we care? Kind of thing, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
It's just sort of assumed, which I don't know. I don't mind that too much. I like the journey. The focus on the journey itself was nice. It felt like the story was moving in several directions, like very quickly. Right. At first, I thought they were going to be stranded down there for a long time, and then I thought they were going to be like separated for a long time. But that none of that turned out to be really what the story was about. It really turned out to be about the family, and then them discovering more about the world, and then ultimately like having to completely change the mission based on new information, which is cool. And yeah, I was okay with that. The climax is probably the most annoying part of this movie because throughout it, right, we have Ethan there. He even mentions at one of the very first things he says is like, "What is a weed except for a plant you don't like?" Which is perfect for his
Right.
where he ends up, which is that every part of the ecology has its purpose, and we shouldn't be fighting against that, right? We should be living in harmony with it. That whole message of like we should be living in harmony doesn't really come to fruition for the rest of the crew. It's just Jaeger, or not Jaeger, Searcher and Ethan who have that realization and then try to convince everybody else, right? And then Jaeger's like, "You went to the other side of the mountains? I gotta see this for myself." It's like, sure, actually, why not? Like, why don't we just stop doing what we were doing, take a couple of minutes, head over there to the nostril or whatever it is, go look at the giant eye, and then reassess? Like, can we take 10 minutes to do that, or does it have to happen right this second? But like
Right.
instead, there's like an action scene where they're fighting each other. Lucy Liu is like, "No, lock him put him in the locker," and then later they're all like hugging at the end. It's like, "Wait, you were trying to kill us earlier."
Right.
It's like it doesn't. I don't know. It just doesn't connect. I keep returning to the movie Soul. Did you see that
Yeah.
Pixar? The climax of that movie is so quiet. It's just Joe sitting at his keyboard, like reminiscing over his life, right? And that's when he comes to the realization that he needs to change his perspective and that he needs to help. What's her name? 42 or whatever.
22. Was it 22?
22.
I think it's 22. Maybe I
Tina
don't
Fey,
remember.
whoever it is. Anyway, they, it's like it's not bombastic. There's some action in that movie, right? There's like a lot of kind of fun things that they do with the animation, but the climax of the movie is very small. It's like it falls down, and it's very powerful. And I feel like something like that would fit really nicely here, where we have like, oh, it's like there's so many moments where people are falling off of things in this movie. Like, you have all of that to like, make it exciting, and then but the climax of the movie is sort of this quiet contemplative moment where they realize how small they are and what role they have to play in this environment, something that's spurred on and encouraged by Ethan, right, who ends up being the heart of this movie. Having the whole team go outside and suddenly have this like lively discussion about what they should do is an exciting way to, I think, end your movie. And then you can still have the whole thing where they're like cracking down on the with the with the pickaxes on the Pando, and then Ethan's outrunning the Reapers. You can still
Right.
do all of that, but you don't have to. I don't know. It's the artificial like what's it called, conflict between the members of the crew just didn't feel right at all, and it felt totally out of place. So I don't know. It just felt like they were like, we have to have an action scene, but we built up the story so that wouldn't make sense. But we're gonna do it anyway.
Right, exactly. No, I completely agree. It felt very unearned, like they kind of like get there and it's like, I feel like I should be very tense about this, but I don't know why I'm tense about this.
Right.
Like there's just a lot of like confusing emotions, and like you said, like they started off as like everyone's happy go lucky on the same side, and then they switch sides and they try to throw them in the closet, and there's this like they come out of the closet and the captain's just like, oh, guess I was wrong. Okay, we're friends again. It's like that would never happen in real life. There's no way. They're like
You're like,
people,
don't you remember them fighting just a minute ago? You know, it's
right,
almost at blows, hand to
right.
hand. People were trying to knock down doors. Reagan was bucking the ship back and forth, sending what's her name, like sending all over the cockpit. Yeah, I don't know. It's ridiculous, silly.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so yeah, I think that there's just the the story structure does not hold up as well as it really should for what they're trying to get across. I think there are much better ways to use that same plot, but you can deliver it so much cleaner. And make it make sense a little bit more to where the audience can get a little bit more sucked in. So I think that's also kind of a hard part with it. Maybe this is just me, but I had a really hard time getting sucked into the story. Like I very much enjoyed being sucked into the world. Like feeling the world was very, very cool, and feeling like you're like actually inside of a living being. That was a very cool element of the story. But once they got to this is a dying organism that we need to save, I didn't really feel like I was part of that mission, like
Sure.
I didn't feel quite as connected to that plot. Like I kind of went back to that, like, well, why do I care? Like you haven't shown me that matters.
Yeah,
So
I
like
agree.
it's just, and that's like when I was first told about this movie, because my sister watched it and she told me that I wouldn't like it, and I was like, well, why not? And she told me that there was a very big like anti-agriculture story to it, and there's a very big anti-agriculture ending, and I was like, oh, well, that's kind of unfortunate. It seemed like a pretty pro-agriculture movie to me. And I went and watched it, and I could see what she means. It's not exactly how she said it was. It's not like agriculture bad kind of movie. It's more like we have better ways of solving the issues that we have than what we're doing right now, kind of.
Mhm.
Which, take that as you will, but the environmentalist plot to it was just not conveyed in a way that should make people care about the environment. Like I didn't watch that and immediately go, okay, well, now I want to go take care of my own planet. Like I just didn't really correlate to me like the way that I thought it should have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking away from this that there's better solutions to our problems is probably the most charitable way to describe
Right.
message of this movie, because honestly it feels like what it's trying to say is that we shouldn't try to do anything, right? Like we should
Right.
let nature run its course and we shouldn't get in its way,
Hmm.
which is not really a tenable um uh like position to hold as humans. A civilization is built upon the idea that we have bent nature to our will, and especially people in your field, is
Right.
essentially what our entire civilization is built on. So it's sort of disingenuous, and obviously appeals to nature are just fallacies, because there's nothing in nature that says that nature is good or that nature cares about us.
Right.
If you're interested in prolonging human life and human happiness, you wouldn't look to nature necessarily for your solutions, at least not all the
Right.
time. So,
Yeah.
um, I was very curious after watching this, what your perspective is on this. Right, I think obviously the Gaia take is out. Right, we can't just let things run its course, but it seems like Searcher hasn't quite got his finger on it either, right? You've already
Hmm.
mentioned a couple of his mistakes, but I mean, where do you think you fall into that line? I mean, are you sympathetic with Ethan, or do you feel like Searcher is misrepresented?
That's a very good question. So I to answer it simply, I lean a bit more towards the searcher side of things. That's not to say that he is faultless. Obviously, like there was some error there, but I can understand his storyline a bit more than Ethan's. And it's not that I'm like, anti-environmentalist by any means, because I believe that a good farmer should be an environmentalist of sorts. Farmers are stewards of the land. They should care about the environment. They should put effort into protecting it and preserving it wherever they can. I just believe in a different type of environmentalism than is often advocated for. Like you mentioned, the whole like Gaia, let the Earth run its course kind of thing just doesn't resonate with me, because I mean, looking at this from a what if situation, let's just say that Searcher didn't ever take the Pando back to his home and start farming it. Presumably, it would have continued to grow anyways. Like obviously this is a very like infectious plant, that
Yeah.
is growing in multiple parts of the mountains. He just happened to find some of it and took it back home and made it grow faster. But over the course of several years, that entire mountain could have been covered in panda. We don't know what this stuff actually does or how it grows or any of that. Who's to say that it wouldn't have gotten to Gaia or whatever we're calling the turtle, anyways, and it would have caused the same thing. And if humans didn't intervene, then the story would have happened just the same, pretty much.
Well, not exactly, because they don't have the technology to stop it.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. So I think that you can't necessarily make the argument that, it is not our responsibility to intervene with nature, that we just need to let nature do its thing. Because the thing with nature is if it does its thing, there's a high chance that a lot of things are going to die just because that's what nature does. Nature, like you mentioned, there is no good or bad in nature. It just is. It just does its thing. Um, you know, Species go extinct all the time because that's just naturally what happens. We try to prevent that from happening. We have endangered animal programs to make sure that certain animals don't go extinct. Naturally, those animals probably should have gone extinct a long time ago. If they can't survive in today's nature, whether or not that's a result of our actions, then that's kind of just that's just how nature intended for them to go. But this world doesn't really orient itself in a way that is preventable from anything bad happening.
Hmm.
Both the world in the movie and our world, you can't prevent every bad thing that's going to happen. That being said, I think that Searcher, without hindsight in mind, obviously, I think that Searcher did the right thing. Bringing the panda home, he was thinking about this from the perspective of, this could really help us. Which is what a not just a farmer, but what a good member of society should do. They should look for solutions to help with current problems. He saw that that his society was deficient in technology, that they were deficient in innovation, and so he saw a solution in bringing that panda back home to be able to fix that. And even when he realized his mistake, he still wanted to go back home and continue growing other types of food to maintain that structure of, like, we need to be able to support each other. So I lean a bit more towards that side in terms of the conversation about our role in the environment versus our role out of the environment. I'm a pretty big advocate of the idea that if we, like I said, a good farmer should be a natural environmentalist. If you want your crops to grow, you'll take care of the soil. If you want your animals to produce, you'll make sure they're healthy. If you want to continue to be able to farm for many generations and to have your next of kin continue to be able to farm, you will take care of your land and you'll take care of the land around you. That's just kind of, not to say common sense, but most farmers typically know those sorts of things. And it's often the case that people who don't come from agriculture don't realize that the practices that are being used are with the intention of trying to maintain those goals. Sometimes we overdo it. Obviously, there was a heavy part of the story that was based on don't use pesticides, because that was obviously what was causing part of the issue was the overuse of pesticides in the form of crushed pando. But in the real world, pesticides are used as sparingly as possible on most operations because they're incredibly expensive and farmers know that they're going to damage the environment, so they don't want to use them more than they have to. Are there going to be farmers that over apply? Absolutely. More often than not, that's not beneficial, so it's not really something you're going to see on a lot of operations, but it will happen. But speaking from the remember, so when I said my sister warned me about this movie being anti-agriculture, she didn't watch the entire thing. She watched it
Really?
up. Yeah, like she was watching it with her kids, so she got through a good portion of it, and then they had to like go off and do other things. So she like saw bits and pieces of it, and she saw the very end, and she saw like the whole environmentalist message, and she was kind of like, oh, I get this. This is anti-ag. She didn't see the post-credit scene where like he's growing the regular crops, and his dad comes back to help him and all of that sort of stuff. If she would have saw that, I think it would have changed her perspective a little bit, because that shows the movie's not saying that we don't need to farm. It's
Right.
just saying that we don't need to farm the way that we're doing it, or at least they don't need to farm the way that they're doing it. Because there's other ways of producing renewable energy, like the wind turbines. There's other ways of producing food. Like, what I kind of gathered from it was they're a bit more like we should be producing food organically is kind of what they're pushing towards. Lower pesticides, lower use of conventional methods, lower use of fertilizer, that kind of stuff. That's kind of what the impression I got from it was, which again I'm not entirely on board with, but I don't disagree with it. Like I would rather take the let's grow organically than the let's not grow at all, perspective. Like that is okay with me. Obviously there's reasons why we can't feed the entire world on organic, but on a small island like that, maybe it works. Maybe that's what they
Sure.
need. So I'm going to say it again. Searcher did what he thought was the right thing. He just wasn't as good of a farmer as he thought he was because he didn't think to look at the roots of his plant and realize what they were actually doing.
I mean, makes sense. I mean, so what do you think about the allegory for, I guess, ethanol, right?
Mm,
It's using these plants as fuel, essentially, right? I
right.
mean, that's sort of true for fossil fuels as well, not quite as directly, right? But and even for ethanol, it's not quite as directly, but um, it's still kind of the same idea. It seems like a pretty clear allegory to me. Do you feel like that's an apt metaphor, or do you feel like it's missing something?
The ethanol conversation is kind of a difficult one because I I don't have a super strong stance on it. Like I've heard arguments both ways, and I have heard good arguments on both sides. I think that the allegory is definitely there. I think that they made a fair assessment of the situation. I don't think that we're as reliant on it as they try to make it seem in the movie. Like obviously we don't
Sure.
have coffee makers that are relying on ethanol or even fossil fuels. But I get the point they're trying to make, and I get the intention behind it. The issue that I have with it is that they are very quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like they see this this one thing, and again, that's kind of you mentioned your banana situation, where like I mentioned, we did an episode on that a couple years ago when there was a massive outbreak of Panama disease or TR, I think it's tropical run 4 or something like that.
Okay.
This disease that just wiped out tons and tons of banana operations because, like you said, bananas are typically cloned from each other, and so they are very genetically susceptible to disease because they're all the same. So if something can wipe out one of them, it's going to wipe out all of them. That's kind of the big concern with monocropping. You don't want to grow one of the same crop, and you especially don't want to grow it for 25 years without ever letting your soil rest. Because for one, you're going to kill your soil, and for two, you're going to give yourself a huge, huge, huge weakness to whatever can wipe out that crop.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's I don't think that the argument for well, we over rely on this resource, therefore it's going to kill us, is quite as clean as they try to make it in the movie. Because logically speaking, they should have had a backup plan in case that ever failed. Like
Mhm.
Panda, them relying solely on Pando was their mistake. In the real world, obviously, it can be said that we rely a lot on fossil fuels or that we rely on ethanol a lot, but we do have alternative sources of energy production. So if something did fall down, in theory, we could pick ourselves back up relatively quickly. Whereas in their world, they were completely lost without Pando.
Yeah.
So I think that they just kind of exaggerated a bit more than they probably needed to get the point across. But I again, like I said, I do see where they're coming from with it.
I mean, it makes sense. It's an interesting way to like show this thing that's a real thing, right?
Mhm.
It's to show it so directly. I think it's pretty interesting. And it's I don't know. It's just kind of fun to think about it in those terms, honestly.
Yeah,
Um, Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I for as much as I disagree within the movie in terms of like their assessment of agricultural production and methods of energy production, I do like that they're having the conversation. I will say that. Like I like that movies are starting to become comfortable with having that discussion. Um, I don't like the stance they're taking in the discussion necessarily, but they're not actively saying, well, we need to stop doing this altogether, and I appreciate that. They're at least saying, hey, maybe we're not doing the right thing here. Maybe we should look at our what we're doing and kind of think of some other options. I like that. I like that idea. I think that it's good that we're continuing to progress towards that route of being able to talk about these things more effectively. Because a couple years ago, that wasn't the case. We refused to talk about anything revolving around agriculture, around food, around energy production. We just kind of let it happen, and we had people on both sides that were arguing, and nobody was actually addressing it. Now that we have movies saying like, hey, maybe it's time for us to actually talk about this before it becomes an issue, I think that's a really, really good thing. No matter what stance they take, I just, like I said, I wish we had a little bit more representation on both ends to kind of show what the other side of it looks like too. But yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts on all of that.
I think that's really good. That's a really good point. Showing the connection between environmentalism and agriculture is often the missing link. There's been lots of environmental movies, but showing that those two things are linked, in that at least in the brief moments we get at the end, that they can be in harmony, is something that should be shown more often, and
Mm.
should be at least be presented as possible.
Right.
And yeah, often, in environmental movies, right, there's this sort of like uh traditional conservative stance. We can't change anything for, you know insert evil reason because it's a movie.
Right.
It's And I think that kind of taking this approach of, there are no bad guys, right? As you said multiple times, and I think it's clear. I had the same exact thoughts that Searcher was doing the best he could with the knowledge he had. That there's ways to overcome our problems by, basically we're coming together and not fighting within ourselves.
Mm.
I appreciated the kind of optimism that's on display here. And although it doesn't seem like they are coming across real problems, I'm okay with, throwing that out for, the sakes of a fantasy story, especially one that is sort of reflecting real life in a colorful and fun way.
Yeah. And I think that like I'm a very big I'm a very big advocate of things need to matter, like if you're telling a story, it needs to matter. Um like I don't necessarily believe in having stories that are just for the sake of being fun, that like there needs to be intention with them. I think that stories are most effective when they have something to them, they have a message, they have some kind of lesson to be learned. And so I think that, like I said, I think that the idea behind what they were trying to tell with this story was really interesting. If it could have been delivered a little bit more cleanly, I think it would have hit a lot harder, and they would have actually had a lot more interesting reviews on it. Like I think people would have had a lot more of uh, a stronger stance on it, or at least like would have thought about it for more than a week if it had, like we mentioned some of those plot points earlier, where it didn't just alleviate all the conflict immediately, or it didn't just pretend that what they were doing, like you kind of alluded to it earlier, but I think that it's one of the biggest issues with the movie is that it establishes this idea that they were doing something that was working for a while, and they realized it wasn't working, and they got rid of it, and everything was fine. It's like
Right.
that is not how the world works.
Absolutely not. Well, they had the benefit of it only being 25 years, right?
Right.
A lot of the people that were in Avalonia, right, probably remember what it was like before they had Pando, and so it's a
Right.
little bit easier for you to like be like, oh, okay, well, this thing is, even though we're used to it, perhaps there's something new on the horizon, or perhaps we could make do with the old ways. But if you've grown up with it, if it's been around for hundreds of years, if nobody in your family can remember what it was like to not have it, that's a different story.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious from the non-agriculturalist perspective, what were your thoughts on some of the, like how they had the whole anti-pesticide push, and how they had a lot of the push away from more conventional methods. They were kind of leaning more towards that, like it's okay to farm as long as you're doing it environmentally safe, and as long as we're maintaining the structure of this ecosystem and all that kind of stuff. Like from somebody who's not actively researching this stuff nonstop, like I have to, like what is your perspective of that?
Well, it seems pretty clear to me that the message the movie is trying to say is that we need to live in complete harmony with the environment, in that any just a pure appeal to nature, right? Which I
Mm,
find not compelling at all. I feel like it's not addressing the issue at all. It's far more complicated than that.
mm,
And like I said, like civilization is built on this. It's not possible for humans to exist without these, um, in the way we exist today, without the reliance on agriculture. So I didn't really appreciate the kind of heel turn that Searcher takes near the end when he's like, "Pesticides are our best friend," and
right.
he winks at the camera and is like, "I only use Roundup." But I don't, I didn't really appreciate that. But um, I've kind of taken more of a nuanced approach from that perspective, and maybe my conversation with you have influenced that in some way, but who knows? The So it seems pretty clear that they're pushing very hard in this direction, but that direction is not tenable. But I'm open to the idea that there's more for our world that to teach us, and that there is things that we're disconnected from because of technology.
Mm,
There are certainly experiences and human um, potential that has been lost with time. There are things that we used to be able to do and no longer have the capability to do them because not through like necessarily evolution, but just through natural complacency.
Mm.
We no longer have to be so worried for our lives. If you make a mistake, if you make a wrong turn on your car, it's not the end of the world. But if you make a wrong turn in the jungle when you're living in the caves, that could be the end of you. That could be the last
Right.
mistake you ever make. So you have to be more careful. And I think just the situational awareness and directional abilities and just things like that have been sort of lost to time at this point for majority of humans on the planet. And I think that there are probably other skills related to those deeper ones that could be useful to us that we have also been discarded. And our connection with the earth, I think, has been largely taken away. It's interesting talking to you specifically because of your relationship with the environment. Because you're part of it, you're more connected to it than I think most people are. But there's still this like healthy distaste, or that's not the right word, but like there's this idea that it's a resource to be used, it's a resource to be respected, but it's something that has to be eventually kind of corralled, right?
Mm.
Domesticated, maybe even,
Yeah.
which is I think certainly more on the searcher part of the spectrum that's presented here, but it's not. I don't think that that's necessarily wrong. I certainly believe that there needs to be something like that, because I'm not so naive to think that stuff just appears on the store shelves. I know that it all comes from somewhere, but it's also worrying to think about our disconnection with nature, right?
Mm.
Because the more we have this, I think we've talked about this before, the more disconnected we are from our environment and just our bodies in general, the less we believe that our effects will have any sort of downstream effect to us, right? And as we've mentioned, there's a cascade effect here. Hurting the environment or changing the environment in any way will have effects on our abilities to live on this planet. Maybe not even the ability for you to live in the area you live in, but maybe the effects on the foods that you rely on. So it's I don't know. It's just something to constantly be worried about, I suppose. Whenever I start thinking about climate change too much, it really makes me worried because it honestly feels like we don't have much of a solution. I know we've
Yeah.
been moving toward. There have been strides in recent years toward something that looks like a solution, but yeah. Anytime someone says, "Oh man, it's so hot," I'm like, it's just getting started, baby. The next 30 years, it's going to
Yeah.
be worse and worse. So. Um, it's certainly something to worry about for sure.
Yeah. No, I definitely get where you're coming from. I think that to to further kind of solidify my stance on the relationship between agriculture and nature, like I mentioned earlier, I think that farmers need to be stewards of the land and therefore they should be more environmentally conscious, and most of them typically are. But I've always seen I think it's largely important that humans maintain their connection to nature. Like that is something that I think is a huge priority that we don't really take advantage of enough. But I see agriculture as the bridge between nature and society. If you think about it, our closest connection to wolves is through dogs, right? Domesticated forms of things are the safest way for society to interact with the natural form of things. So agriculture being domesticated nature, as you put it, which I think is a great way of describing it, is our way of interacting with the natural world without having the risk of being involved in the natural world. We still get to get dirty. We still get to play with soil. We still get to see crops and animals interact in their natural environment. But a natural environment that we've kind of curated for them, which I get kind of eliminates the natural part of it, but there's still a natural component to it. They're not sitting inside a shop.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, and that's
so,
just seeing that or being aware of it or having that direct interaction is powerful because
mm,
suddenly it stops being so much about just you, right?
right.
And honestly, I mean, I think we should be fighting against individualism in all its forms. And I like to think of the earth sort of in like a Gaia terms where
Mm,
we are all sort of swimming in a soup of oxygen and nitrogen, right? And therefore the barriers that are between you and nature or you and any other person are just just societal constructs in a way, right?
Right.
We in some form are swimming in the same goop as everybody else is. We're all in the same ocean. And if you look at the ocean, it is alive, but it also just looks like one big mass of something, even though
Right.
it's made up of lots and lots of little pieces. And that's how I tend to think of humans, but also of just like humans as like an entity, but also as our role on the planet, right? Sure, we have the ability to adapt this environment to ourselves, but we also are part of that environment. And this kind of goes back to uh, Marxism in a way, where your environment changes how you are. But it's this materialism that has a real effect. Your interactions with the world affects that, and then the world affects you too. It's all nurture.
Mhm.
It's all part of your interactions with things. And I think that having like breaking down that barrier between what is between saying you're not natural and that the natural world, I think, is a really powerful one. And
Yeah.
saying like this is part of you, right? This food that you're growing will eventually become part of you. um and breaking down that barrier at all and saying it is already part of you, right? From a Buddhist perspective, it's going to it takes away the kind of disgust or like the separation. And I think it gives you that feeling of responsibility that you need to take care of your environment and make it better for you and the other people in the world.
Yeah, no, couldn't have said it better myself. I 100% agree. A couple things to add on there. I think that agriculture and the environment actually do have somewhat of a symbiotic relationship. If the environment's hurting, agriculture is going to hurt. If the agriculture isn't doing their job, then the environment's going to hurt. So it's important to maintain that relationship. But society, the people who are buying that food and who have an impact on how food is grown, have just as much of a relationship as the industry and in the natural world, which is again, going kind of back to the purpose of my show in the first place,
Yeah.
helping people realize their role in all of that, helping people realize the importance that they have in maintaining the structure and the relationship between the natural world and the world that we are able to kind of curate into what we need it to be in terms of producing food and other resources that we're trying to use. But yeah, no, I completely agree with you.
So as I was thinking about this movie, it definitely reminds me a lot of the immune system
Mhm.
too, which is something that, again, I just read this book, which was very interesting. And uh, Detmer, or however you say his name, Kurzgesagt is how I refer to him.
Right.
He says at the end of the book that the immune system he thinks is the most potential for teaching someone something new about the environment, because it's something that we interact with constantly but never really think about, and lots of people don't understand. And he says part of
Mhm.
the problem is that there's a steep learning curve. There's a lot of things you have to know first, and then it sort of comes together. But there were certain elements of the story that like reflect actually how our immune system does work. There was like a skin barrier that they went through, but before they even made it through that barrier, they were being attacked by different like those bird things, which is basically how that works. There are immune cells, macrophages, that live just under the skin that start attacking things as soon as anything permeates it. And there's also cells that once an infection gets to a certain point, will leave the battle scene and make its way to your lymph nodes, essentially, where it will take that lymph node highway to your like the central lymph area and recruit specialized weapons to fight off the intruders, which is sort of what Splat is doing. He is identifying threats and then sending the Reaper cells after them, which are they look terrifying. Which, if you were a bacteria and you were facing down one of these things, it would be terrifying.
Yeah.
These cells are ruthless and really really good at killing things. So it's it's kind of cool to see that in play. The one thing I wish they had shown was neutrophils.
Mm.
Neutrophils are a type of immune cell that are essentially suicide bombers. They will come in and they basically just shoot like a machine gun, just like, or a shotgun, like a ton of like sharp stuff cutting through bacteria all over the place, and it will actually destroy like some of the environment around it. It will destroy civilian or natural, like your body cells as well. But at a certain point, they will essentially rip themselves open and use their DNA as a net
Hmm.
to like capture things. And it's like a last ditch effort where they'll end up dying. But it's useful because they are so dangerous that they end up doing a lot more damage to your own cells in some cases than they do to bacteria or any sort of pathogen. So it's I wish they had shown something like that. I wish they had some sort of like guys that after Jaeger like hit him with the flamethrower, they exploded or something. That would have been
Hmm.
kind of fun. But anyway, it was just kind of neat to see that. And honestly, like they're like 2 steps away from showing like a really cool, like a really accurate area of the immune system, right? They could have had
Yeah.
swarms of things to show. I can't remember what part of the complement system, like a sandstorm or something coming through. But yeah, there's just a couple of things that they could have thrown in there to really highlight it, and then you would have had a really fun way of exploring the immune system in an anime movie. But I digress.
Yeah, that would have been
It's
super
just
cool.
a wish I have.
Yeah, no, I wish I would have seen that as well. I'm also a huge anatomy nerd, so I think that would have been really cool to get to explore a bit more. Like you said, like we really didn't get to see, like we got to see a little bit of the immune system, especially when we got closer to the heart. We got to see a lot of really cool stuff, but we really didn't get to see a lot of the intricacies that we could have with the immune system. And there's lots of ways they could have incorporated it before having the big plot twist that they're inside of a body without us realizing it.
Absolutely.
So that would have been really cool to see. But so yeah, I had a couple more questions for you before we wrap up here.
Okay.
Just kind of wrapping, putting a nice bow on everything. So you asked me earlier if I agreed with Ethan or Searcher more in terms of their decision. So I want to flip that on you a little bit. If you had to follow one of the paths, Jaeger's, Searcher's, or Ethan's, which path would you follow?
Am I on Avalonia or am I on Earth?
That is a great question.
That affects my answer.
Okay, let's say Avalonia.
I think Ethan has a pretty solid plan here, right? As much as Searcher and Jaeger's certainly mean well, right?
Hmm.
There's certainly something bigger at play, and the fact that humans, I guess, evolved on to be like to live on top of this turtle thing, and they don't seem to be having much other issues. Certainly means that he's onto something.
Hmm.
Obviously, the next big thing would be to try to communicate with the giant turtle, find out what it wants and what you can do right to help it, and then possibly right like expand your empire or build your own floating island, or live underwater or in space or something. I don't know, expand your empire that way. But
Hmm.
it certainly seems like your primary goal should be to keep the giant living land mass you live on happy. So I think Ethan's got a good point there, but obviously like we don't see a lot of the other issues, right? If we saw a single mosquito, I would have said nope. We're going with Searcher or maybe even Jaeger. We're going with Scorched Earth here. And not dealing with these things are too deadly and too dangerous to just let pass. So
Okay.
but we don't see any sort of bugs. So
That's true. Okay, well, that's good to know. So if there are no mosquitoes, then you are Ethan. If there are mosquitoes, then you want to burn the planet. Got it.
yes.
All right.
Now you know where I am.
Awesome. Okay, and then my last question for you is a little bit not off topic necessarily, but it is a kind of tangent from Strange World. It's a little bit more content based, and this actually will help me a lot as a podcaster and as a content creator. So I've noticed that movies that tend to revolve around somewhat agricultural topics, like Strange World, like The Good Dinosaur, like other movies we've discussed in the past, tend to not be quite as popular. Whether that be because people have issues with the actual storyline, or people have issues with the content, or maybe it just didn't quite sell as well. Maybe the advertisement wasn't as good. I'm not quite sure what the reason is, but I've noticed that movies that tend to cover those topics, movies that I like to cover a lot, tend to not get as much attention. I mean, one of the more popular examples I can give is WALL-E, and WALL-E is probably one of the most forgotten about Pixar movies, despite myself loving it, despite you loving it, despite us knowing people that love it. Like I've gone to Disneyland twice in the past year and have found very, very little Wally merch, which I think is a crime. But besides that, why do you think it is that agriculture movies are less or not maybe agricultural movies, but movies that kind of cover that general topic of not just environmentalism, but of land stewardship, of of growing your own food, of that sort of concept? Why do you think that those are maybe less popular?
I mean, I don't know for sure, but my guess is that it's just not relatable enough.
Mm,
Most movies, are focused on a hero that is purposely very likable and has some very relatable issues, right?
mm,
And even if there is farming at the center of the story, right? I mean, you could say Interstellar is sort of like this, but it's not really focused on it because it's just one of the representations of this character like manifest, right?
mm,
It's not there. It's not like, oh, the farm is having trouble. It's that this guy is too arrogant to buy new equipment, or like he's too poor, and therefore all of his stuff is falling apart. And that's like the representation. The farm failing is a representation of that problem, not
mm.
necessarily like the farm itself. That's so so few people. I think, what do you say, 2% of
Yeah,
um,
less than 2% of Americans produce food.
right. So it's just not a big enough demographic
Yeah.
to like target. I think that's probably like honestly like a big part of it. Um, and because most people get their food from the grocery store or from a farmer's market or something. They're not necessarily interacting with that area of the public, so it's just not something that we tend to think about. And I think that there's not a lot of like stories ripped from the headlines about
Mm,
agriculture as well. There's certainly been like recently there's been more of a backlash against some agricultural um, practices, especially in terms of environmentalism, right? But it's not as exciting as like stuff that's happening in Silicon Valley,
mm,
right? And that kind of rags to riches story is far more exciting. I think it sparks imagination far more than like the slow, steady work of working on a farm, right?
gotcha.
The closest like a representation I can think of showing like actual farm work is the movie what's it called? I think it's called The Gift. No, The Ultimate Gift.
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
And what in that movie, it's a classic story.
Mhm,
The main character, his grandfather or his father dies and leaves
mhm.
him like $100 million or something, but only if he does something selfless. It's something like it's some sort of convoluted thing where he has
Yeah,
to give
like a
up
series
all
of
of his
tasks and
worldly possessions to do these things. And one of the things he has to do is go work on his uncle's farm.
mhm.
And he like puts up a fence or something like that, and he's like, "I'm done." And the uncle's like, "Work on the farm's never done." It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's what it's like, man. So that's a that doesn't really it's shown as punishment in that movie more than it is like, or penance more than it is like a noble pursuit, so
Right.
um I don't know. I that's just off the top of my head the things I think.
Okay.
But I think I appreciate you bringing Wally in as an agriculture movie, because I don't necessarily think of it as an agriculture movie until I talked to you. I never thought of it that way. So I think I challenge you to look deeper into other things and see where those representations are, because you can't like you've always said, right? You can't get that far away from agriculture. It's always
Mhm.
there in the background in some one form or another. So there's always going to be that kind of inkling somewhere, even if that's not the focus of the movie. There's no reason why you can't focus on it. So
That's true.
that's my challenge to you.
Okay. Which I mean, I am always happy to find agriculture and everything, as you know. I mean, I found it in How to Train Your Dragon, so I can find it anywhere.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
But okay, that's really interesting. So my follow-up to that is from a as someone who watches a lot of movies, as someone who has a podcast dedicated to reviewing movies as well as other things, uh, and as someone who consumes a decent amount of content from a variety of sources, whether it be YouTube or TV or whatever it may be, what would a I know you kind of talked about that rags to riches, or kind of like more like an exciting storyline. What would be something that you would be more drawn to content related wise, that like let me rephrase. So like for my kind of content, I'm producing agriculturally educational content, or at least content that is meant to encourage conversations about food production and about agricultural production. So what would you as a non-agriculturalist look for to get your attention enough to want to consume content that's based around that subject?
I'm thinking of two very different things.
Okay.
First thing I'm thinking of is, you ever watch that YouTube channel, Primitive Technology?
I've seen it. I've seen a video or two. Yeah.
It's basically, if you're not familiar with it, they're these sort of, they're not really tutorials. They're
Mm-hmm.
more like him, you watching him build something
Mm-hmm.
from nothing. He's like out in the woods. I think he actually is Australian. He has like a bunch of land, or his parents do, or anything or something. And he goes out into the woods and he chops down trees, and then picks up a bunch of mud and creates like a house.
Mm-hmm.
Or recently he's been like refining metal, which has been very interesting. But it's very slow paced. It's there. He never says anything. The only audio is just the sounds of the forest and him like chopping at stuff. And it's very calming. It's very interesting because he'll actually put in the subtitles what descriptions of what he's doing, and he says I've read several of his like FAQs and ask me anything type things, and he says he watches a lot of tutorials and will basically just follow those to show what's going on, and he does sort of explain in steps what's going on, and then you see the progression throughout time. And it's sort of weird because there isn't really necessarily a continuity. Sometimes you see things that he's built in the past. Sometimes he tears that down and builds a whole new thing that looks very similar to the thing that he's built before. So it's not exactly clear like what's going from one place to the other. But as far as like entertainment value, they're unrivaled. They're so calming and they're so enthralling. Like I'm just sitting there just absorbed in it. It's not like he's like that great at filmmaking or anything. It's just, I honestly feel like he has a pretty poor sense of when to cut. But it's still like, it still feels very satisfying watching him go from one thing to the other, and for it to be explained basically all at the same time. Sometimes you're like, what is he doing? Why is he doing that? And then it all kind of comes together, right? And it's just a very nice feeling. The other way you could go about this is go the TikTok route and just go pure outrage, right? Say, oh, like if this happens, then we will no longer have eggs or something like that. And then you're like, here's the problem, right? And you just kind of cascade down and explain, kind of go deeper and deeper very quickly from piece to piece to show why you get from one place to the other, right? And you need some like good visuals and kind of like a fast paced cuts, moving from side to side kind of thing. Like, okay, here's what this is, here's what this is, and basically just giving kind of a quick digest of all the different pieces that go into whatever. And I think, I mean, eggs is a good example since the eggs prices are soaring right now. You could talk about why that's happening and like, kind of the effects of like where that's coming from. Maybe don't talk about it from an economics perspective as much as from a farming perspective. Like, what is happening that's affecting this? I think from that perspective, it's more fun to be like, this thing is connected to this thing and you never knew why, and then kind of drawing those things together, right, in like a 1 to 3 minute video, I think would capture people's attention. That's what I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's really good advice. I'll have to take that in consideration. I have noticed that my TikToks tend to do a little bit better than my podcast episodes. I think that
TikToks
short
are much
structure.
easier to consume. People,
Yeah.
an hour podcast is like, that's a dedication, but 6
Right.
seconds, a minute, I can do that. I can
Right.
do that for an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I will definitely take that in consideration. Awesome. All right. Well, those are all the questions I have. Do you have any closing statements on Strange World, on anything else we talked about today? Anything else you want to throw in there?
No, I thought it was fun. I liked the movie. Thanks for recommending it, and encourage me to watch it so we could talk about it.
Yeah, always. It's always a pleasure to have you on. You're always a lot of fun to bring on. You have very different perspectives than I do, which is great because it provides me some challenge and some interesting conversation. But yeah, that's always a pleasure to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, before we close out here, just want to give you another chance to plug your podcast. I know you guys are going strong. I want to keep that train going. So let everyone know where they can find you and yeah, anything else you want them to know.
Sure. I co-host a podcast called Affable Chat, where we talk about movies almost every week. You can find us by searching for Affable Chat. We're the only affable chat out there. We're on every podcast platform. I challenge you to find a podcast platform we're not on. We're on every single one. And you can also visit our website, affablechat.com, where we have updates there. And my co-host Benjamin hosts a Twitch stream every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time on twitch.tv/affablechat. So you can tune in there and put the chat in Affable Chat if you're interested. That's all.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I will put the links down in the description so everyone can go and find you. If you guys look far enough back, you might be able to find my familiar face on one of their episodes. And
Yes.
hopefully go check that out because that was a fun episode to record. But yeah, no, it's always a great time to have you on, Joey. Again, I appreciate you taking the time for it. I like your challenges. Your whole I challenge you too. That's very fun. If,
You're welcome.
but yeah, so that's all I have. So thank you again so much for joining me. Thank you all for listening and checking out the podcast. Hope to catch you all next week. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.